The twin suns of Virella shone high over the merchant district, casting long golden lines on the polished stone streets. Merchants shouted offers from their colorful stalls. Ships from different worlds floated above the port towers, their silver, hulls glinting in the sunlight. But inside the narrow upper room of a quiet house, Lena sat frozen in place. Her father, Rendell, paced the floor. His voice was tight, the kind of tone he only used when trouble was worse than usual. "Lena," he began, not looking at her, "I have tried every way to fix this, but the debt is too large. The royal family will not wait any longer." Lena's fingers tightened around the cup of tea in her hands. "We still have time," she said softly. "You told me last season." "That was last season," Rendell cut in. He finally stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes tired and heavy. "The king has sent his answer. The debt must be repaid through a marriage." Lena blinked, as if the words took time to land. "Marriage? To Prince Cale," Rendell said. "The king's own son. If you accept, the debt will be erased. Our house will be safe again." The room felt suddenly smaller. The hum of the street below faded. Lena placed her cup down carefully on the table, her hand trembling just enough for the porcelain to clink. "And if I refuse?" Rendell's face darkened. "If you refuse, they will take everything. The shop, our home, and the guards will take me to the debt courts. You know what happens there." Lena looked out the window. Beyond the rooftops, the palace's silver spires rose into the clouds, as bright and cold as ice. She had seen Prince Cale once before, from a distance during the mid-sun parade. His expression had been hard, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as if the cheering crowd meant nothing to him. She had never imagined speaking to him, let alone marrying him. She wanted to protest, to shout that this was unfair, but her father's voice had a weight that silenced her. The next day, a royal carriage came for her. It was shaped like a shining sphere with clear walls, gliding silently above the street. People stopped to watch as it passed. Inside, Lena sat across from a palace, attendant in a dark blue uniform. The woman gave her a small, polite smile, but said nothing for most of the ride. When the carriage reached the palace gates, Lena's breath caught. The walls were made of white crystal, and beyond them stood gardens that seemed to stretch forever. The air smelled of strange flowers, sharp and sweet. The attendant led her inside. Marble floors reflected the light from tall windows. Every step echoed faintly. Servants in pale robes bowed as she passed. Finally, they stopped before a tall bronze door. The attendant gave her a small nod and pushed it open. Inside was a long hall with a single table in the center. At the far end sat Prince Cale. His hair was dark, his features sharp. He wore the silver armor of the royal guard, though there was no battle to fight here. "Lena of House Rendell," the attendant announced. Cale's eyes met hers for the first time. They were calm, but unreadable. He stood, crossed the room, and stopped a few steps away. "You understand the arrangement?" he asked, his voice low and even. "Yes," Lena said. Her voice felt smaller than she wanted. "This is not a choice. I asked for either," Cale continued. "But the king has made his decision. The wedding will be in 7 days. Until then, you will remain in the east wing of the palace. You will have everything you need." Lena nodded once. She wanted to ask why he seemed so detached, but her courage failed her. That night, In her new chambers, Lena sat by the window. From here, the city below looked like a sea of lanterns. She thought of the marketplace, of her father's tired eyes, of the cold formality in Cale's voice. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of distant horns. She looked out toward the west gate of the palace. A procession of vehicles was arriving, sleek, metallic, and unlike anything she had seen before. Their surfaces caught the light in strange patterns. At the front of the line was a ship marked with the blue crest of Earth. The humans had arrived. She had heard of them in stories. Traders and explorers from a far-off world. Some said they were clever and quick. Others whispered they were dangerous, always looking for ways to gain power. This was their first official visit to Varela in decades. From her high window, Lena saw one figure step out from the lead ship. He was tall, dressed in a dark uniform that contrasted with his pale skin. His hair was cut short, and his eyes moved with calm focus as he looked over the crowd of palace guards. Even from a distance, she thought she saw him pause. Just for a moment, looking up toward the palace windows. She turned away quickly, unsure why her chest felt suddenly tight. The next morning, news spread quickly through the palace. The human delegation was here for peace talks and trade agreements. The council would meet in 3 days to discuss terms. Some whispered that the humans wanted more than trade, that they might ask for an alliance against the raiders in the outer systems. Others thought they were here to test Varela's defenses. Lena told herself it didn't matter. Her own future had already been decided. She would be married to Cale, bound to the royal family, and her father's debt would vanish. That was all. Yet as she walked through the palace garden that afternoon, she caught sight of the human again. He was speaking with 2 Virelan guards near the fountain. His voice was steady, his movements precise. But there was a warmth in his expression that made him stand out in this cold place. For a brief moment, his eyes met hers across the garden. She looked away, but not before she saw the smallest hint of a smile. And for the first time since the king's decree, Lena felt something she hadn't in many weeks: curiosity. The morning of the wedding arrived far too quickly. The palace was alive with motion, servants rushing down marble halls, florists carrying baskets of golden lilies, cooks shouting orders in the kitchens. From her chamber window, Lena could see the great silver hall being prepared. It was a place built to impress. The high ceiling shimmered with light from hanging crystal lamps. The walls were carved with scenes of old Virelan victories. Long tables were set with fine glass and plates rimmed in gold. In the center of it all, a raised platform waited for the ceremony. That was where she and Prince Cale would stand before the king and the nobles. Her attendants moved around her like quiet shadows, draping her in a gown of pale silver thread. The veil they placed over her head was thin, almost weightless, but it blurred the world slightly, as though she was looking through a dream she could not escape. "You look perfect, my lady," one of them whispered. Lena didn't answer. Inside, she felt cold. When the bells began to ring, she walked the long corridor toward the great hall. Nobles turned their heads to watch as she entered, the music from the royal band filling the air. Kyle stood at the platform already dressed, in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the light. His eyes met hers only briefly before he turned toward the king. There was no smile, no warmth, just the steady formality of someone following an order. The king spoke words of honor, debt, and duty. Every sentence reminded Lena of why she was here, not for love, but for a bargain. When the vows were spoken, Kale's voice was calm, controlled. She matched it with her own, her words quiet but clear. And just like that, it was done. The reception began immediately after. Tables were filled with roasted meats, fresh fruit, and tall crystal flasks of shining drinks. Musicians played slow, graceful melodies, while nobles gathered to speak about trade and politics. Lena sat beside Kale at the head table. He spoke politely to the guests, but offered her no conversation beyond a few short, formal phrases. She tried to focus on the music, but then a sudden shift in the room caught her attention. The great doors at the far end opened, and in stepped a group of humans. They were dressed in dark uniforms marked with the crest of Earth. At their head was the man she had seen from her window, the one whose eyes had met hers in the garden. Harold's voice carried across the hall. Ambassador Marcus of Earth and his delegation. Marcus walked forward with a steady confidence, his eyes scanning the hall as if memorizing every detail. He bowed slightly to the king before being invited to join the royal table for the evening. As he approached, his gaze passed over Kyle, then stopped briefly on Lena. It was only a second, but she felt it like a quiet spark, sharp and unexpected. Throughout the reception, Marcus spoke with the king and several high-ranking nobles about trade. His words were measured, yet clear, and even when challenged, his expression stayed calm. He spoke of fair exchange, mutual defense, and trust between worlds. Lena found herself listening more closely than she expected. There was something in his tone, not just skill, but a kind of sincerity she had rarely heard in the palace. At one point, when Kale stepped away to speak to a general, Marcus glanced toward her. "You are newlywed?" he asked, his voice low enough not to draw attention. "Yes," she replied softly. "Then I will not keep you from your husband," Marcus said, but there was no mockery in his tone, only a simple observation. Lena hesitated, then asked, "You came to make an agreement with Virella?" "That is my task," Marcus answered. "But tasks mean little without truth. I hope to find that here." Before she could respond, Kyle returned, and the conversation ended, but Marcus's words stayed in her thoughts long after. Later in the evening, when the music grew livelier and the guests began to dance, Lena stepped outside to the palace terrace. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of the sea. Lights from the city below shimmered like a field of stars. She didn't hear footsteps, but she sensed someone approach. Turning, she saw Marcus standing a few paces away. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, "but I needed a moment away from the noise." She gave a faint nod. "So did I." They stood in silence for a time, the city lights stretching endlessly below them. Then Marcus spoke again. "Do you like your home?" he asked. Lena looked toward the distant markets and the winding streets where she had once walked freely. "I used to," she admitted. "Before everything changed." Marcus studied her expression. "Change can be heavy," he said quietly. "But sometimes it is the only way forward." She didn't know why, but she felt as if he understood more than his words revealed. When she returned to the hall, Kyle was speaking with the king. He glanced at her and gestured for her to sit beside him. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations she barely heard. By the time the final toast was given and the guests began to leave, Lena felt a strange mix of weariness and alertness, as if something important had shifted in the background of her life. She told herself it was nothing. Marcus was just a visitor from another world, and she would likely never see him again. But as she prepared for the night in her chambers, she caught herself remembering the way he had looked at her. Not like a prince claiming a bride, but like someone searching for a truth he hoped to find. And somewhere deep inside, a thought formed, unwelcome but impossible to ignore. Perhaps her story in the palace was not as fixed as she had believed. The next few days in the palace passed slowly for Lena. The wedding was over, but life felt no different, her movements still carefully watched by attendants, her conversations limited to polite greetings and short exchanges with Kyle. Kyle himself was distant, always busy with meetings or military drills. When they did speak, it was about schedules or formal appearances, never anything personal. Lena often walked through the palace gardens in the afternoons, just to breathe air that didn't smell of polished stone and incense. The gardens stretched in every direction, filled with winding paths, tall crystal-leafed trees and fountains that sang softly in the wind. On the third afternoon after the wedding, she noticed something unusual. At the far end of the east garden, past a line of flowering vines, stood Marcus. He was speaking to a palace scribe holding a small data pad. His voice was calm, but his posture carried a quiet alertness. When the scribe left, Marcus looked around, and his eyes met hers. There was a pause. Then he began walking toward her. Lena considered leaving, but her feet didn't move. When Marcus reached her, he inclined his head politely. "Princess," he greeted, his tone respectful, but not overly formal. "Ambassador," she replied, her voice steady. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Marcus said. "No," Lena answered. "I was only walking." He glanced around at the tall garden walls. "A peaceful place," he said. "Though I imagine even here, the palace is never truly quiet." Lena gave a faint smile. "Quiet, but never free." Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, as if her words confirmed a thought he already had. Marcus spoke again, his voice low enough that the nearby attendants couldn't hear. "I came to Varela for peace talks, yes. But I've also learned peace is not only signed between rulers, it's built by those willing to take risks for it." Lena studied him. "What are you saying?" "I have seen your position," Marcus replied. "You are here because of an arrangement, not a choice. I know this because arrangements are the easiest chains to hide. They look like gifts." His words caught her off guard. "And why would that matter to you?" "Because," Marcus said simply, "Virella and Earth need each other. But your council sees only gold and power. I want someone in that room who sees people." Lena's first instinct was to step back. This was dangerous talk, too close to speaking against the king's decisions. But curiosity kept her in place. "You speak as if I could change the council's mind?" "You could," Marcus said without hesitation. "You know the customs, the debts, the limits of your world better than any human. And you are bound to the royal family now. That gives you a voice, if you choose to use it." Lena's thoughts raced. She had never imagined herself part of politics. Her marriage was supposed to settle her father's debt, not place her in the center of interworld negotiations. Still, there was something in Marcus's tone. Not command, not flattery, but trust. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the garden archway. Cale appeared, his expression unreadable as he approached. "Ambassador," Cale said curtly, "you will be late for the council session." Marcus gave a respectful nod. "Of course, Prince." Then he glanced at Lena for just a moment longer, before turning to leave. When Cale and Lena were alone, he spoke without looking at her. "You should be careful who you speak to. The court is quick to twist words into weapons." "Is that a warning?" Lena asked quietly. "It is advice," Cale replied, and then he walked away. That evening, during dinner, Lena noticed tension in the air. Servants moved faster and whispers passed between the guards. She overheard enough to understand. Someone in the council had raised doubts about the humans. There were rumors that Marcus was not only an ambassador, but a strategist sent to measure Virella's weaknesses. Her mind went back to his words in the garden. If the council turned against him now, Earth's alliance might collapse before it began. The next morning, Lena's chance came unexpectedly. She was invited to attend a smaller council meeting as part of her introduction to royal duties. The meeting was held in a round chamber, its high windows casting golden light across the table. Marcus was there, along with the king, Cale, and several royal advisors. The discussion quickly grew tense. "The humans speak of alliance," said Varys, an older advisor with sharp eyes. "But what they truly want is influence. They will use our resources until we are dependent on them." Marcus responded calmly. "If that were my goal, I would offer promises without details. Instead, I offer clear terms, written and open for your review." Varys smirked. "Clever words do not prove loyalty." Lena spoke before she realized she was going to. "Loyalty is proven by action, not by fear." The room turned toward her. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept going. "If the humans wished to harm us, they would have sent soldiers, not traitors. Perhaps we should judge them on what they have done. So far, not what we fear they might do." The king's gaze lingered on her for a moment. Varys looked displeased, but he said nothing more. Marcus, across the table, gave her the smallest nod of thanks. After the meeting, Lena walked in the outer hall, her mind racing with what she had just done. She had never spoken so boldly before. The king. Marcus caught up to her. "That was well said," he told her. "I didn't do it for you," she replied quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Marcus said, "but you did it for something. That matters." They walked together until they reached the main hall, where they had to part ways. But before he left, Marcus spoke one last time. "There will come a moment when you have to choose between what is safe and what is right. When it comes, I hope you will remember this conversation." Lena watched him go, the echo of his words staying with her long after he disappeared from sight. That night, she stood again at her chamber window, looking out at the city lights. She told herself she didn't trust Marcus, not fully. But there was no denying it. He had planted a question in her mind, and once a question takes root, it is not easily forgotten. The palace felt different after the council meeting. Servants whispered in the corners, guards exchanged short, tense words, and the air itself seemed heavier. Lena had noticed the change in Varys most of all. The royal advisor, always sharp and watchful, now moved through the halls with a new urgency. He spoke in quiet tones with the king and Cale, and his eyes often darted toward Marcus during official gatherings. At first, Lena thought it was nothing more than political rivalry. But that belief faded one quiet evening when she took a wrong turn in the library wing. She had gone there to find an old book on Virella's trade routes. Something Marcus had mentioned might help her understand the council's debates. The halls in this part of the palace were dim, the windows covered with heavy curtains, the stone floor cold beneath her steps. As she reached the corner near the map room, voices drifted from behind a half-open door. She recognized one instantly, Varys. "We cannot allow the human to remain," Varys was saying. "If his plan reaches the king's desk, it will pass, and then Earth will have its hands in every port we own." Another voice, low and cautious, replied, "You mean to block the treaty?" "Block it?" Varys scoffed. "No, we will remove the problem entirely. The ambassador will have an accident." Lena froze. The second man hesitated. "The king will ask questions." Varys's tone grew colder. "Not if it happens outside the palace walls. He walks the lower halls often, yes? The ones near the supply tunnels. A few missing guards, a moment in the shadows. And the human will trouble us no longer." Her breath caught. She stepped back silently, heart pounding in her ears. She didn't wait to hear more. Her instincts told her enough. Varys was planning to kill Marcus. Lena turned and hurried away, forcing herself not to run until she was out of the library wing. That night, she could barely eat. Kyle noticed her distraction but said nothing. The thought of telling him crossed her mind, but she wasn't sure if he would believe her or if he would even try to stop Varys. In the end, she decided there was only one person who needed to hear this. The next morning, Lena waited near the east garden until she spotted Marcus walking toward the council chambers. His two human aides followed at a distance, carrying data pads. "Ambassador," she called softly. He slowed, noticing her serious expression, and walked closer. "Princess, we need to speak. Alone." Marcus studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me." They took a side path into the deeper part of the garden, where tall hedges shielded them from view. The sound of the fountains covered their voices. Lena told him everything she had heard. Varys's words, the plan, the location. When she finished, Marcus didn't look shocked. Instead, his eyes narrowed slightly. "I suspected he might try something, but not this soon." "You knew?" Lena asked. "I knew Varys feared me," Marcus replied. "But fear can take many forms. This one is direct." "You can't go to the tunnels," Lena said firmly. Marcus gave a faint smile. "I will avoid them for now. But if he is planning something, I need to know how far it goes." They spoke for a few more minutes, planning carefully. Marcus agreed to change his routine, keeping to guarded corridors and meeting rooms with heavy security. But Lena could see something else in his eyes, a quiet determination to confront the threat, not just hide from it. Before leaving, Marcus placed a hand lightly over his heart in the human gesture of thanks. "You didn't have to warn me," he said, "but you did. I will remember that." The rest of the day passed slowly. Lena kept an eye on the movements in the palace, noticing Varys growing impatient. He spoke with several guards she didn't recognize, men who didn't seem to belong to the usual watch. By evening, her worry had turned into a sharp knot in her chest. She needed to know what Varys was planning now. That night, while the palace prepared for a royal dinner, Lena slipped away from her chambers. She took the service halls, moving quietly until she reached the outer ring of the lower corridors. Here, the air smelled faintly of oil and sea salt. The walls were older, less polished than the main palace. The only light came from small wall lamps, their glow barely touching the floor. From behind a corner, she spotted Varys speaking with the same two strange guards. "The ambassador will pass through here tomorrow after the midday council," Varys said. "You will follow him into the north tunnel. It will be over quickly. Leave no trace." The guards nodded and melted into the shadows. Lena's pulse quickened. Tomorrow, it was happening tomorrow. She hurried back toward the main halls, nearly colliding with a familiar figure. Kyle stood in her path, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing down here?" he asked. "I could ask you the same," Lena replied before she could stop herself. Kyle's gaze lingered on her for a moment. Then he said, "These halls are not safe for you. Return to your chambers." Lena hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything. But something in his expression told her he might not act quickly enough, or at all. "I will," she said at last, and walked past him, heart pounding. That night, she wrote a short message on a thin strip of paper, small enough to hide in her palm. It said only tomorrow, North Tunnel, midday, danger. She folded it tightly, wrapped it in a silk thread, and kept it in her sleeve. She would pass it to Marcus in the morning no matter what. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound in the palace seemed louder. The distant clatter of armor, the muffled steps of guards, the wind against the crystal windows. Somewhere below in the cold stone tunnels, a plan was waiting to be carried out, and Lena knew that if she failed to stop it, Marcus would not live to see the end of the week. The ship's engines purred like a great sleeping beast as it drifted in the black ocean of space. Leora sat by the observation window, her eyes locked on the endless stars. They were so far away, yet she felt closer to them than she had ever felt to her own home. Every sparkle reminded her of the freedom she once thought was impossible. Beside her, Aaron worked silently at the control panel. His hands moved with precision, adjusting routes, checking fuel levels, and recalculating their path. The tension between them had softened since they left Virelia, but it had not vanished completely. There was still so much unsaid, questions unasked, answers unspoken. Leora finally broke the silence. "Where are we going?" Aaron didn't look at her. "Somewhere safe." "That's not an answer." He sighed. "Somewhere your father's men won't follow. Somewhere you can choose what you want to do." She blinked. The word choose felt strange. For so long, her life had been mapped out by others. Her father's deals, the council's orders, the marriage arrangement. It had all been decided. Without her voice, Aaron turned from the controls and faced her. "I can take you to the human colony on Corvin Station. Or, I can take you to the border worlds. Out there, no one cares who you are or what debt you owe." Leora stared at him, searching his eyes. "And what about you? Where will you go?" He hesitated. I'll go where I'm needed. Before she could respond, the ship's sensors began to beep sharply. Aaron rushed back to the panel, frowning. "What is it?" she asked, standing beside him. "Trouble," he muttered. "Two ships, Varelian patrols, closing in fast." Her stomach tightened. "How did they find us?" Aaron's voice was calm, but urgent. "They might have tracked the ship's signature from Varelia. Hold on!" He pulled the ship into a sharp turn, engines roaring to full power. The stars outside became streaks of light as they sped forward. But the patrols were faster. In minutes, their dark, curved hulls were visible on the scanners. Predators closing in on prey. "They'll catch us," Leora whispered. "Not if I can help it," Aaron said. He flicked a switch and the ship plunged into an asteroid field. Giant rocks spun slowly in the void, casting long shadows. Aaron steered between them with nerve-steady skill, but the patrols followed, weaving through. The dangerous field without fear. One patrol ship fired a warning shot. The energy blast grazed their right wing, making the ship shudder violently. Leora grabbed the edge of the panel. "We can't outrun them forever." "I know," Aaron replied, his voice low. "We have one option left, jump drive." Her eyes widened. The jump drive was risky in such unstable space. One wrong calculation, and they could materialize inside an asteroid, or worse, in the heart of a star. "You'll never make the coordinates in time," she said. He looked at her, sharply. "Do you trust me?" She froze. It was the first time he had asked her that. Slowly, she nodded. "Then hold on." Aaron's fingers flew over the controls. Lights flickered across the console, alarms blared, and the ship groaned under the strain. Behind them, the patrols closed in, their weapons glowing with power. "Now!" Aaron shouted. The jump drive activated with a blinding flash, and the universe tore open before them. Stars stretched into streams of light, and everything vanished into white silence. When reality returned, the ship floated quietly in a calm stretch of space. The stars looked different here, colder, sharper. The scanners showed no sign of the patrols. Leora let out a shaky breath. "We made it." Aaron nodded, but there was no relief in his eyes. He was staring at the coordinates on the screen. "Where are we?" she asked. He turned to her. "Somewhere I never planned to go. The Edge." She frowned. The Edge was a region beyond charted space, a place of legends and danger. Many ships that entered never returned. "Why here?" she whispered. "Because it's the one place Virelia's breach cannot touch," Aaron said. "But it's also the one place where every choice has a cost." He moved away from the controls and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You wanted freedom, Leora. Out here, you'll have it. But it means deciding who you want to be and who you'll stand with when the dangers come." Her heart pounded. She had escaped the chains of her father's debt, but now she was staring into a different kind of unknown. For the first time, she realized freedom was not an open door. It was a path, and she would have to walk it herself. And, somewhere deep inside, she knew the moment to decide was coming faster than either of them expected. The night in the alien capital was not quiet. Shadows moved quickly between the tall crystal towers, and whispers of unrest floated in the air. The city had been tense ever since rumors spread that a human, Thomas, was inside the royal halls. Humans were rare here, and their presence always stirred fear or curiosity. Inside her quarters, Lyra sat by the wide window, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the dark mountains met the glowing sky. The room felt both like a prison and a shelter. Her marriage to Prince Carol was never out of love. It was the repayment of a debt her family owed to the crown. But lately, something inside her had shifted. She no longer thought about debts or obligations. She thought about freedom, and she thought about Thomas. Ever since their brief meeting in the garden, her mind replayed his words. "You are more than the chains they put on you." Those words refused to fade. She had never heard someone speak so plainly, without fear of royal punishment. He was different, not just because he was human, but because he seemed to see her as a person, not a role to be filled. A soft knock broke her thoughts. It was Thomas himself, stepping inside with caution. His eyes scanned the room before settling on her. "I should not be here," he whispered. "And yet, you are," Lyra replied, her voice steady. He approached slowly. "I heard something tonight. They plan to send me away tomorrow. They think I have been influencing you." "You have," she admitted quietly. "And they fear what I am starting to feel." Tomas leaned closer, his tone urgent. "If they send me away, I might not return. If you want freedom, you must decide tonight." Lyra felt her heart pound. "Freedom?" she repeated. "Yes. There is a network, humans and aliens, working together. They can take you away from here, away from the palace, away from this marriage." Her hands tightened on the window frame. She thought of the life she had before, simple, small, and full of restrictions. But at least it was hers. She thought of her parents, of the debt they believed could only be repaid with her life. And she thought of the long, cold halls of this palace, where every smile was a mask. "What would I have to do?" she asked finally. Tomas's eyes softened. "Trust me. Come with me tonight. Once we leave the capital, they cannot force you back." Before she could answer, loud footsteps echoed in the hallway. Both of them froze. Thomas moved toward the side door. "Think quickly, Lyra," he said, and slipped out before the guards arrived. The door burst open. Prince Carol entered, his face calm but his eyes sharp. "You have been speaking to the human again," he said. It was not a question. "He came to me," she replied evenly. "I will not have my wife distracted by outsiders," Carol said. "Tomorrow he will be gone, and you will remember your place." Lyra lowered her gaze, saying nothing. But inside, something solid had formed, a decision she could no longer ignore. That night, the palace felt alive with watchful eyes. Guards moved in pairs, the gates were locked, and the air buzzed with tension. Lyra waited until the deepest hour of the night before slipping on a plain cloak. She moved quietly through the service corridors, places she had memorized over months of boredom. In the shadows near the stables, Tomas was waiting. "You came," he said, relief in his voice. "Yes," she replied. "Let us leave before I change my mind." They mounted 2 small hovercrafts and sped toward the outer gates. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of alarms as soon as their absence was noticed. Red lights flared across the city. The chase had begun. Behind. The palace towers glimmered like cold fire. Ahead lay the dark mountains, silent and unknowable. Lyra did not know what waited there, danger or hope, but she knew it was hers to face. For the first time in years, her heart felt light, and somewhere deep inside she realized her debt was no longer to the crown or her family. It was to herself, and she intended to pay it in full. The morning on Curvin Prime was unlike any before. The sky was heavy with silver clouds, and the air hummed with quiet tension. Across the city, the streets were nearly empty. People were waiting, watching, wondering what would happen next. Inside, the council hall, a wide chamber built from dark stone and glowing blue metal, Leora stood between her father, Elder Varen, and the human envoy, Daniel. Her hands were cold, but her eyes were steady. Today was the final meeting. The council would decide if the humans could stay, if trade would continue, or if both species would turn their backs on each other forever. Varen spoke first, his voice deep and commanding. "Your people owe a debt," he said to Daniel, "not in coins, but in the safety you have taken from us. The mining incident cost us lives. The agreement must be honored, or there will be no peace." Daniel didn't flinch. "And yet, Elder, it was not our doing. The collapse happened because your own overseer ignored the warnings. We brought engineers to help. At our own risk, we've saved hundreds of your miners." "Is that worth nothing?" the council murmured, voices low and uncertain. Leora felt the weight of every word. A month ago, she would have stood beside her father without question. But now, after everything she had seen, Daniel's courage, the human crew's loyalty, the way they never treated her like a bargaining tool, she could not remain silent. She stepped forward. "If this continues," she said, her voice clear, "both our worlds will lose. We can keep trading insults, or we can choose to trust." Varen turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Leora, this is not your place." "It is my place," she said firmly. "You gave me a way to repay a debt, but in doing so you gave me something else, freedom to see for myself. And I saw the truth. The humans are not here to conquer us. They are here to survive, just like we are." Her words rippled through the room. Some council members shifted in their seats. Others looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Daniel stepped beside her, his voice low but steady. "We can rebuild the mines together. Share the work, share the profits, and most of all, share the responsibility for what happens next." The silence stretched long and heavy. Finally, Elder Maris, the oldest member of the council, spoke. "We have lived too long with suspicion," she said. "I say we give this alliance one chance, a true alliance, not one born of debt but of choice." Murmurs rose again, louder this time, but the tone had shifted. Varen's jaw tightened. He looked at his daughter, then at Daniel, and finally at the gathered council. "If this is the will of the council," he said slowly, "then so be it. But if you betray us, human, there will be no second chance." Daniel inclined his head. "Understood." The vote was taken. By a narrow margin, the council approved the alliance. The decision spread through the city like fire through dry grass. By nightfall, people were already speaking of new markets, new technologies, and new friendships. That evening, as the twin moons rose, Leora and Daniel stood on the balcony of the guest quarters. The city lights shimmered below, and the air smelled, faintly of metal and rain. "You spoke for us today," Daniel said quietly. "I spoke for myself," Leora replied, "and for what I believe is right." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe your eyes changed the first day we met." Leora didn't answer right away. She looked at the city, at the stars beyond, and at the human who had once been nothing more than a stranger forced into her life. Now he was something else entirely, someone who had shown her another way to see the world. "Perhaps," she said finally, "it was my heart that changed first." The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of a new beginning, not just for them, but for two worlds that had almost chosen to walk apart. And in that moment, the debt was truly gone.